Thanks for coming back to see me on my channel. As promised, what I'd like to do today is share a bit of my story, a brief look at my history with food and eating and weight, and how over the last 2 years I've managed to go from feeling very unhappy and out of control a lot of the time, to be honest, to finding a new way of eating and a new way of looking at health, and basically how I've lost, I've lost 7 stone in the last 2 years, which I can't quite believe. And for the first time ever, I've made that change without following a controlling, difficult diet plan, and I've managed to make change and maintain that change. So if that sounds interesting to you, let's get into it. So to take it back a lot of years, I, as a young person, grew up, as I'm sure a lot of women particularly did, in a real diet culture, and feeling, always that pressure that comes with that. I lived in a household with a mum that always struggled with her weight, still does, who was always on a diet. And, whilst I understood that and I felt for her and I understood her struggles, you can't help but take that on too. And so I grew up in an environment where food was branded as good or bad. Behaviours were therefore around food branded good or bad. And you can't help but learn from that. And I saw my mum always on and off a diet, and it was awful. And I kind of thought, I don't want to be like that. And then, of course, I am my mother's daughter. We are very similar in looks and body types, and I ended up following her down that path, essentially. So whilst as a young person I wasn't particularly overweight, not at all really in retrospect, the building blocks of that sort of culture were there. And as I progressed through teenage years, I was in fact always quite interested in healthy eating as well. I mean, I became a vegetarian and then a vegan during my teens, and I still am to this day. And so there was always a contradiction with me where I've been interested in health, ethical eating, healthy eating, and I've always loved a lot of what you might describe as healthy food. But then there's that contradiction with being out of control and binging, which I'll get into more at some point. Anyway, so going into my 20s, I started to have a problem, a noticeable problem. Weight was going on. I went through some unhappy times in an earlier relationship, and I started to gain weight. And I felt at the time that and this was the beginning of really feeling like this for years, that I was the only person that struggled with this. I had a lot of friends who naturally seemed to be very slim. No one else seemed to be struggling with food or out of control. And that kicked off really a lot of years of feeling real shame around my weight and eating habits. Anyway, in my mid-20s, I had gained a fair bit of weight, and for the first time joined Weight Watchers, and my goodness, there began many years of that endless cycle of going to Weight Watchers or Slimming World, which I also did later on, and gaining and losing the same stones. And I'm sure you can relate to that. And it's a horrible experience. I initially was very successful at Weight Watchers. I hit my goal. I was only 24, so I guess it was a lot easier back then. But I couldn't maintain it. I just found it very hard. And of course the weight crept up again. So I sat in that place for a long time. And then when I hit my mid-30s, my weight really did start to increase. I guess I was in my relationship and happy. I actually met my husband, Stuart, in my mid-20s, in fact. And, by my mid-30s, we've been together a long time. You're comfortable. I say comfortable, I've also had, the struggles that we all have with like work, mental health and all of those things. So, there's ups and downs for all of us. But by my mid-30s, I was starting to really gain weight, and certainly between 35 and 40, I gained a lot of weight. And by the time I was around late 30s, I was at my heaviest. And I should tell you, I've already recorded this video once, and I decided not to post it because, for one, I went on too long. Secondly, I'm new to this. I hope you'll excuse me looking at my notes and stopping and starting, but I tried to edit it and it was a shambles, quite frankly. But also I felt embarrassed and shame still about talking about the numbers, talking about my weight. Because although I'm sure people could look at me and they could see the size I was, but I didn't know anyone else that was that weight apart from my mother. And I just felt embarrassed. But I think I want to come here, I want to share with you, and I love watching other women who are so honest, and I feel like I owe that honesty back to this community. So I'm going to be brave and talk about my weight and how much I actually weighed rather than just my dress size. So by late 40s, I had reached 17.5 stone, which is about 112 kilos. And I'm going to mention my weight in stone and kilos. I now record my weight in kilograms if I do record it, partly because I found continuing to use stones in later years was quite triggering. It just brought back memories of slimming clubs. And also when you are being seen by the doctors in the NHS, they tend to record your weight now in kilos. So that's why I mentioned kilos too. Anyway, 17.5 stone. I was a size, 18 to 20. A good 20 on my bottom, let's be honest. Possibly more sometimes. And, just could never shift it, and just felt like it didn't matter what I ate. I could eat less, I could eat more, and I just seemed to stick at that weight for ever such a long time. Anyway, fast forward a few years to my early 40s, and I was, really struggling, and I wanted to make a change. And I thought, I'm going to get a personal trainer. I had a bit more money at that time. I could afford to pay for a personal trainer a couple of times a week. And I ended up seeing her for a couple of years. And I really had actually quite a lot of success. She helped me get into exercise. I'd never been sporty, and although I had attended gyms and aerobics classes over the year, I found it really hard. So having someone come to my house and train me one-on-one was great. And I worked with her, and I ended up losing quite a lot of weight. I got down to really about probably 11 stone 10-ish, something like that. I was between 11.5 and 12 stone. My dress size had dropped down to like a 12, 14. And, I couldn't believe it. I felt great. And I had exercised a lot, but also she had helped me with making better choices with my food. And a lot of her ideas, the way she helped me was through cutting out sugar, essentially. And I didn't think I was someone that ate an awful lot of sugary things, because I wasn't one to buy a lot of sweets necessarily. But of course there's sugar. As we all know, there's hidden sugars everywhere. And so I made this big change over probably a year to a year and a half. And I did sustain it for a little while. But then my personal trainer moved away, and I had thought in retrospect that a lot of that weight loss had come from exercising, but I can see that really it was the dietary changes mainly. And I guess I got complacent again, and I thought, as long as I'm doing my exercise, I'll be fine. And of course, you know where I'm going with this, the inevitable, the weight starts to creep up, creep up, creep up. And so by the time I got to, this would be probably 2018, well, I think I saw her till about 2016 maybe, and then by a couple of years later, my weight had crept up again. Not by any means to what it had been, but a good few stone. And you know how that works. You go to buy your size 14 and it's a little tight, and you think, well, it won't matter if I buy 16. That gets a little tight, and that creep happens. And I should say that during all of this time, I did still exercise, and I considered myself to eat healthily a lot of the time. But I have always had an issue, certainly very badly when I was younger, of really like binge eating. Although I say that really has stopped really from my 30s, that excessive way of eating. But I have to be honest that over the last few years, especially prior to me making these changes, I would eat food not for nourishment or enjoyment or pleasure. It was a way of comforting. I would eat it when I was happy. I would eat it when I was sad. I would eat it when I was struggling. I would eat it to celebrate, to reward myself. And I know you can all relate to this. And what I found myself doing was getting into patterns where I would eat very basic food, piles and piles of pasta. You know, I was a vegan and I could go all day and really not eat a vegetable because I would be eating bread, endless sliced bread with peanut butter, pasta with maybe a couple of veggies in it and a bit of pesto, but big piles, big piles, just to shove it in and push the feelings down and push the emotions down and comfort myself, and almost, and this might sound extreme, but almost to drug and harm myself, because I don't know if it wasn't I didn't feel deserving of health and wellness, or if I just needed it as a numbing thing. But that was the pattern I found myself in. And that went on until, you know, we're into the 2020, 2021, that sort of time. And again, I got to say, you know, for a long time, my weight would go up and then it would stick. And it didn't seem to matter if I ate a lot or ate less, it would just stick. Anyway, I digress. So I considered myself someone that didn't eat terribly, but I could see that the patterns were very bad. You know, I had a real problem with crisps. I did a lot of crisps, and I wouldn't just buy a small bag of crisps. I would buy a big sharing bag of crisps. And so instead of having a healthy lunch, I might eat a massive bag of crisps. And then 2 hours later, I'd be hungry again, and I'd eat some toast. And then an hour later, I'd be hungry again, and I'd have like one of these, you know, like a vegan chocolate bar or something, or a vegan, you know, flapjack biscuit, whatever. And I could never feel nourished. I could never feel satisfied. And I've always had a bit of an issue with blood sugar, in that I can drop my blood sugar quite quickly, you know. And I used to think, oh, I'm one of these people, I need to eat really regularly, otherwise I get low blood sugar, I get shaky. And I now realise it's because it was what I was eating, not how often or how much. I just wasn't sustaining myself properly. So I was getting these highs and lows and highs and lows. And that really was just coming up to where I was hitting perimenopause. And essentially I felt terrible all the time. I was having energy dips. I never felt I could get enough food in me to keep me going, to keep me full. But then all I seemed to be doing was eating. And I got to the stage a few years ago where I just thought, I feel like my entire day is controlled by food, hunger, and thoughts of food and hunger, and something's got to change. So we find ourselves in 2022, late 2022. I turned 50, and that was the start of, I was feeling really bad with menopause. I went on HRT, I think a few months after that. So I was having all these menopausal, perimenopausal side effects. I was overweight. I wasn't exercising because, again, this is a side effect I since learned of perimenopause. I managed to get a frozen shoulder, and then a year and a half later, the other shoulder became frozen, and that completely stopped me exercising. Extremely painful. I don't know if anyone's had one, but it was horrific, and it lasts, well, I ended up going over about 3.5 years, that shoulder injuries. So by the end of 2022, I was just trotting along, just stuck in this place and not really doing anything about it. And then I had a real wake-up call in terms of where my weight had got to. So, a little bit of a tangent. As I have mentioned before, my husband Stuart has been on a lifelong health journey. He was born with a genetic liver condition. He's had a liver transplant 6 years ago, and subsequently developed kidney issues, and just a potted version. I can talk about it more in the future, but he was on dialysis for several years and has, in the last 6 months, had a kidney transplant very successfully, and he is, fingers crossed, he's on the mend, he's getting stronger, he's getting fitter, and that's fantastic. But at the end of 2022, I decided to put myself forward to be tested to see if I could be a living kidney donor for him. Because he doesn't really have any family members that could be tested. He's got quite a small family. So I put myself forward for that process, and this would be right around Christmas 22. And I, at this point, weighed around 16 to 16 and a half stone. So I can't think off the top of my head what my BMI was, but it was probably between about 32 and 34. I'm 5'6", so I don't know, somewhere in that kind of that range, which I think possibly the NHS classifiers, I don't know if that's overweight or obese. Anyway, that's regardless of that. Anyway, so I filled in the application form and I got a call back. And I mean, this was shocking. This still shocks me to this day. I was told that I was too overweight to be tested. Not too overweight to go through the surgery, just too overweight to even be tested. They wouldn't do the test to see if I was eligible until I'd lost weight. And that just absolutely devastated me, because not only did I feel this incredible shame that I had become someone that was in that category, that the NHS would judge me like that. And I got nothing but praise for the NHS. They have been amazing in the way that they have treated Stuart. They've been fantastic. But what I don't think I realised is that whilst we can accept ourselves, and we should accept ourselves, we should be happy where we're at, we should be happy at what size we're at if we're happy there, that when push comes to shove and you're in front of the doctors, they can say yes or no, based on your weight. So obviously, I mean, and I felt so embarrassed and so ashamed and so much like I'd let Stuart down, even though he had completely removed himself from that process, because he didn't really want me to be a donor, because it has a lot of health implications to be a donor. You end up being under the care of a hospital for the rest of your life. You have to have check-ins every year, and it would have been very problematic because, with aftercare. Anyway, so he had removed himself. He said, I don't want to put any pressure on you. I don't want to be involved in your choices about that. And that was great of him. Anyway, so of course, I was told I had to lose I was around 105 kilos, 16 and a half stone. And I was told I had to get down to maybe 85 kilos, which would have been about 13 stone. Well, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't probably 16 and a half stone when I applied. I was probably 16. I was told I had to lose, stone and a half, 2 stone, more maybe. And of course, what happened was I went into an out of control shame spiral and actually gained half a stone at least, if not a little more, because I just went into this absolute panic and ended up just feeling frozen and stuck and unable to make a decision. So you can imagine how that made me feel, even more ashamed, even more out of control. So that would have been January, February 2023. So the next few months ticked along and I was just getting worse and worse in how I felt. It's terrible all the time. The menopause journey is just horrific, really, it can be. And I just thought, this is it. I've had enough. I can't get looked at by the NHS for this thing that's important to me because they're saying I'm too big. I don't feel good. I don't feel in control. I feel like I am being controlled by my addiction, my whole lifestyle. And I just was so upset and so tired, just exhausted. So as the months progressed, I thought, I've got to do something. If only because really by this time, by the late afternoon every day, I was just exhausted and starving, absolutely starving and shaking. And I think, God, I've had lunch, I've had a big lunch, I'm going to have a big dinner. Why am I like this? So I started to look online for ways that I could address it. Because as we all know, just going on another diet is so hard and it doesn't always work. I mean, it very rarely works. Anyway, cut to the chase. I started Googling, how can I address food addiction? How can I make change? And I should note that I had even considered going on medication or weight loss jabs. But back then I didn't hear so much about that in the UK. I also couldn't afford it. And it just didn't seem like something that was open to me. And if I'm honest, I also felt ashamed that I had got to the stage where I might be someone that was so beyond helping herself that I was going to need to be medicated. Now, at this point, I didn't know much about these jabs, and I think they're doing wonderful things for people. But it wasn't open to me at that time. Anyway, so through looking online, essentially, I found that what I was looking for was a framework, a way of eating that wasn't a rigid plan, it wasn't counting and measuring, it was a way that I could live. And I think that's key. It was not a way that I could lose weight, it's not a way I could diet for a certain number of months or get to a goal, it was a way I could live for the rest of my life. And I found the concept of ultra-processed foods. And I can honestly say that when I embarked on making these changes, despite what I'd just gone through with the NHS, I wasn't thinking about weight loss. I was thinking about, how do I find freedom? How do I feel better? How do I live my damn life in a different way after 50? So who I fell upon was this book, Ultra Processed People. I've got it here actually, by Chris van Tulleken, who I'm sure you've probably all heard of. He's a British doctor and he's done a lot of work on this. He wrote this best-selling book and I think it only recently come out in 2023. And I can only say it has changed my life. That sounds incredibly dramatic, but it has changed my life. As I say, this is a book, it's probably come out the wrong way around, isn't it? Ultra Processed People, Why Do We All Eat Stuff That Isn't Food and Why Can't We Stop? And I downloaded it to my Kindle, read it really quickly, read it again, and then a year later I actually bought his paperback because he did an extra chapter talking about the feedback he'd got. really what his whole premise is, read the book. And he goes, it's quite a detailed scientific book in places, but he goes into how, what is in our food, who's putting this stuff in our food, and why are we eating this stuff that isn't really food. It's not there to nourish us. It's not there to do us any good. It's there to sell product. It's there to make money for big companies. And they will do whatever they can to make you eat more, because that's how they make money. Of course it's how they make money. And his premise was, read the book, don't change how you eat while you're reading the book, and see how you feel at the end. And his intention of how you would feel at the end is exactly what happened for me, which was, I was disgusted by what I was putting in my body. I was just, when I say disgusted, like really physically didn't want to eat a lot of that food anymore, because he goes into a lot about how the additives are made, the emulsifiers, all these things, where it comes from. And I was just like disgusted. And I think, because I've also always been interested in maybe like the ethical side of eating as well, and about how big companies work, and that's a way they're always marketing these new improved things to you. It really spoke to me, and it didn't actually take long for me to start making changes after that. I just started immediately, and I cannot to this day explain how this was the thing that finally helped me make change after a lifetime of not being able to do it and feeling like I was the only one who couldn't do it. And what I love about this author, Chris van Tulleken, and what I loved about this book is that he is very clear that this is not about willpower. It's not about being greedy or being lazy or being useless with controlling your eating. These foods make it virtually impossible to stop eating them. They create a hunger in us. They create an addiction in us, because that's what they are designed to do. As I say, I'll go into it more in the future. I'd love to dive deeper into this, and but all I can tell you is it's massively, massively changed my life. So I started cutting them out. I immediately noticed change in how I felt with eating, what I wanted to eat, what I actually desired to eat. All of these whole foods that I used to eat, I was actually wanting to eat just that. I didn't want to be pouring big bags of crisps into my mouth. I didn't want to be glugging fizzy drinks and, all of that. So I made change very quickly, and I never weighed myself, because I knew my weight at the start because I'd been weighed at the doctor's, but I didn't have any scales at home, and I really just got on with it, and I just started to really enjoy how I was eating. I felt this freedom, and so that was in July. So it's actually 2 years exactly, July 2023 that I started. And by the end of that year, I had to go back to the GP, and I said, can I hop on your scales? Because I feel like I've lost some weight, and I'd be really interested to see if I have. And I hopped on, and I honestly tell you, I genuinely couldn't believe it. I had I'd gone from about 16.5 stone down to about 13 stone. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. So at that point, I actually did, as an aside, get tested, and I wasn't a match at all for the kidney donation. And it turned out actually I had some minor health issues that would have stopped me being suitable for that procedure anyway, but they only found that out when they tested me. And as I say, Stuart has since gone on to have a very successful kidney transplant. Anyway, so I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my goodness. And the doctor was like, wow, what have you done? Have you been on a diet? I was like, no, I've just stopped eating ultra-processed foods and things. Anyway, I continued, and I can honestly tell you, and I know this will sound disingenuous, but I can honestly tell you, this is the first time that I felt in control, and it hasn't been a struggle. This way of eating has not been a struggle. And I feel like I'm finally eating like how I used to view normal people who didn't have an issue with food. Anyway, I've rambled on for an incredibly long time, but essentially over the last 2 years, I have gone from 16.5 stone to now, and I honestly can't believe this, and I would never have set this as a goal because I didn't think it was something that was attainable, to being 9.5 stone. And that is shocking to me. I basically weigh around, since the beginning of the year, so 7 months now, my weight has just stayed between about 9 stone 4 and 9 stone 7. So I'm usually in the 59 to 60 kilo range. And it seems to stick there. And there's a big part of me, of course, that thinks, oh, it's all going to go away. That won't maintain. But it has. I mean, I sort of reached a level of initial weight loss by the end of last year where I got down to just under 10 stone. And then since the beginning of the year, I've dropped a few more pounds. And I seem to be sitting at that point. So that's where I've got to. I'm really sorry, this has been really waffly and rambling, and I'm looking down at my notes because I'm still new at this and I'm not very good at it. But if any of that sounded interesting to you and it resonates with you, let me know. Maybe leave me a comment. Have you read this book? Have you tried cutting out ultra-processed foods? Have a look at your food labels. It's truly shocking how many healthy foods I thought I was having, that I've got some real strange stuff in them. And I don't know why, but cutting all of that out has just made all the change in the world. And I don't cut out carbs, and I don't cut out oil, and I eat a lot of peanut butter and nuts and seeds and olive oil. So it's not like I'm going low fat, low carb or anything. I'm just going no ultra processed in the house, certainly. I mean, I do eat out when I'm out of the house. You know, I will have things, but I don't actually even crave eating, you know, very badly made, badly prepared things. You know, I like to eat nice food, and if I'm going to have something sweet treat, I want to really enjoy it. I want to have something, a delicious ice cream or cake or whatever, but a really good one, and enjoy it. Anyway, I should shut up for now, but I hope that was interesting, and I'd love to go into a lot of these things more, and hopefully we can share tips and ideas in the comments, and I'll be back soon with hopefully more professional content. And until then, take care, and I'll see you soon.